All right, welcome back to the Prima.Law podcast. As always, I'm your host, attorney James Betzold. Now, the show today is probably one of those that will not be able to be monetized by YouTube or anywhere else, which is fine. I don't make any money off this anyway. But it's a little bit graphic, right? It's near and dear to my heart because as an attorney, there are some things that we're trained to hold sacred. And among those things are the Bill of Rights, right? The U.S. Constitution and the first 10 amendments to it, known as the Bill of Rights, which the founders of the United States put in place for a very specific reason. And so we're going to be talking about that today because there are some very egregious violations of those Bill of Rights that are going on in the country as we speak, or as you are listening to this show today. So I just want you to be aware that, it might get a little heated. Tempers and temperature may raise a little bit here. If that's not your thing, go ahead and tune out. Now, as always, we're brought to you by our sponsors. So as an immigration attorney, we were looking for some really great immigration software to manage our firm with. It did not exist in the marketplace, so we started building it. And over the last 11 years, we've been perfecting it. And it's got some great features now. Integrations with email, billing services, electronic payments, task management, case management board. And what we have is an amazing solution for your immigration law firm or your immigration practice. Now you can find a free trial at www.Prima.Law. We use this every day in our firm. It is practice management software. So it helps you manage your cases. It helps you manage your practice. It helps you manage the workflow. And it's complete with over 150 immigration case types. You're going to have your checklist. You're going to have all the forms you need and all the interviews, all the stuff you need to complete that case, including the package assembly tool and AI features to help you review and check for errors. Again, find a free trial at www.Prima.Law. Now let's get started. Now, those of you who don't know me personally, we do not live far from Chicago. We are a mere few hours away from Chicago. We're tucked away in a idyllic place here in the Midwest. All right. But there's been some really big news coming out of Chicago recently. Some shocking news. In fact, some blatantly unconstitutional events are taking place there. And unfortunately, it's our government that's doing it. Now, before we go any further, I know that some of you out there are probably fans of the current Trump administration, and that's fine. There's probably some of you who are not. That's also fine. In this show, in this podcast, my goal is not to get political, right? But it is important to stand up and defend liberty when it's under attack. And I think that's what's happening right now. And it's happening whenever any administration takes actions that are inconsistent with the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all the other amendments that go along with it. Okay. Now we don't even have to get deep into interpretation or how is it supposed to be interpreted no. With this topic, we can stick pretty much to the plain language. And so one of the things we're going to be talking about today is the Fourth Amendment and the protections that it grants against unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, as an attorney in law school, you will have learned all about the Fourth Amendment. In fact, if you've gone to the police academy, if you studied the U.S. Constitution or U.S. history in high school, you should know at least the amendments that we call the Bill of Rights, because they were so important that the founders, in negotiating the passage of the Constitution, a number of the founders said, hey, we like the Constitution, but it needs guaranteed rights. That needs to happen right away. So the first 10 amendments to that Constitution are known as the U.S. Bill of Rights or the American Bill of Rights, right? They amend the Constitution. They have just as much authority because an amendment to the Constitution has as much authority as the Constitution itself. And the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So when you learn about the Fourth Amendment, right, this is the amendment that keeps the government from harassing you. It keeps the government from invading your privacy. It keeps the government from unlawfully detaining you, unlawfully arresting you, right? You're to be secure. So I'll actually be able to put this up on the screen as well, but I want to read to you. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, for any of you constitutional scholars out there, internet graduates or otherwise, you'll notice that the way that these amendments are worded, right, the right of the people to be secure, et cetera, shall not be infringed. It's recognizing that we all have some sort of innate or God-given rights, right? Some rights that should be ours by nature. And many will say that those rights are given to us by God, and it is the government's job not to infringe upon them. So that's the first thing we need to mention as we're looking at this, is that we all have these rights to be secure, safe, independent, because we're not a nation of slaves. We're not a nation of subordinates. We are a nation of citizens. We're a nation of people with inalienable rights. Okay? So that's the first thing. Now, back when this was drafted, there were no cell phones, right? There were no text messages. All their text messages happened on paper, right? So when it says everyone has the right of the people to be secure in their persons, right, just to be by themselves, free from arrest or from detainment, houses, right? We still have houses, places we live, papers. Okay, so you have the right to be secure in your papers. So the government cannot come and demand that you show them your phone. Now, there's always exception, right? If there's a controversial exceptions, right? If you're going across the border, there's different rules that may apply there. Okay, but we're not going to get into that. It's not the purpose of the show today. Okay, so like I was saying, there are some exceptions if you're crossing an international border, things like that. There's different rules that apply for those. But if we're going to go by the strict letter of the law here, we have the right to be secure in our papers. So the modern day analog of papers is going to be, I don't know, iPhones, right? Cell phones, smartphones. That's where your papers are today, and your computer and your laptops. Nobody walks around with, pirate chests of documents anymore like they used to do in Revolutionary War times. All right, so these are the things that we have the right to be secure in, along with effects. So things, right? People can't just go ruffle through your things against unreasonable searches and seizures. Okay, so there's sort of a lot to unpack there, but it really does speak for itself. We have the right to be secure in these things on our own. Now, what are we seeing happen in Chicago? I want to talk a little bit about that. We see news reports now. We know ICE enforcement is all over the place, right? They recently obtained over $1 billion in funding due to the big, beautiful bill that Congress passed and the president signed, and now it's law. So they've got essentially unlimited money to carry out more operations and enforcement actions and things like that. All right, so we're seeing that happen. And what we saw recently is reports where you have ICE agents rappelling out of helicopters in Chicago, in breaking down doors and going into buildings and dragging people out in the dead of night. And, this is ICE. Their jurisdiction is really not with everybody. Their jurisdiction is to enforce the immigration laws. And this was part of a larger operation called Operation Midway Blitz, right? Started in early September 2025. The goal was to punish sanctuary cities, and Chicago has been seen as a sanctuary city. Over 800 people have been arrested as of October 1st this year. And advocates report that the operation has swept up a wide range of individuals, including immigrants with no prior criminal record, U.S. citizens, and children. Okay, now there may be an argument to make. There may be an argument, and this is going to depend on and who knows what the Supreme Court would say about it right now, and we'll get into why there's so much uncertainty on that as well. But maybe there's an argument that, well, if you're not a citizen, this doesn't apply. Well, Supreme Court decisions in the past have said constitutional rights apply to all persons in the United States, and the government can't take actions against them, etc. But let's just, for example, say it doesn't apply to undocumented immigrants. It sure applies to U.S. citizens, whether they're adults or whether they're children. So that's not even in dispute, but that's what we've seen happen. So here's what we call it, and now a little bit of information about the South Shore raid, right? A 5-story residential apartment building at 7500 South Shore Drive in a historically black neighborhood. Approximately 300 federal agents conducted a pre-dawn military-style raid in the United States of America against United States citizens. Looking at the tactics they used, they had an aerial approach, so they repelled from helicopters, including a Black Hawk helicopter, onto the building's roof. Agents kicked down doors to nearly every apartment and used flashbang grenades. Okay, now let's talk about flashbangs for just a second. Because anybody who knows anything about flashbangs, these are not just like whippersnappers or fireworks that, some rabble-rouser, Dennis the Menace type kid might be using on the 4th of July. A flashbang grenade is a concussive device. It lets off an explosion and a flash so loud that it is designed to incapacitate a human man. Imagine the effect that this can have on a child, okay? And when I say incapacitate, it means your hearing's probably permanently damaged because it's not like they issue ear protection or eye protection before this thing goes off. So you've got short-term damage where probably you can't hear anything, possibly long-term damage. And if we've learned anything about traumatic brain injury in the last 10 years, this is probably going to cause that in the people who suffer from it as well. Now we're talking about flashbangs going off in this residential building in the dead of night. There's also plenty of videos on YouTube right now showing ICE officers chucking flashbangs out the window of their car at people who pull up alongside and are saying, hey, what are you guys doing here? Do you have warrants? And they're getting flashbanged. Okay, so these are not, it's not a fragmentary grenade, right? So it's not designed to throw fragments and disable or kill someone, but it certainly could kill someone if it goes off in too close of a proximity to them, and it's certainly going to be causing some serious injury. So some of the detention methods, right? So they go in, flashbangs, kicking the doors open, breaking, and when you kick a door open, you're breaking it, right? You're not going to be able to lock that later. So it's not like you can just go back to normal after this. Residents, including children, were forcibly removed from their beds, had their hands bound with zip ties, and were interrogated without access to lawyers. Okay, so there's another constitutional amendment. It's called the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution, which provides the right to representation. Okay, you have the right to be represented by an attorney whenever you're being interrogated by the police. Okay, you have the right to that. If you're a child, I don't know what information you're going to give, but so beyond the egregious assault and the Fourth Amendment violations, you're throwing on top of that the Sixth Amendment violations, saying we're going to interrogate everybody and nobody gets to talk to an attorney. Not to mention the fact that they're now bound together with zip ties. Okay, so we're getting firsthand accounts of the people who are suffering this or who suffered this. Patricia Fisher, a U.S. citizen and resident, stated that agents handcuffed her, pointed guns at her face, and held her for hours. Ebony Watson, a neighbor, witnessed children being detained and zip-tied. She reported seeing them terrified and crying and claimed to hear one agent laugh and say, "F them kids." Now, these are first-hand accounts. In a court of law, first-hand accounts, this is not hearsay. This is an official, you can use this as evidence. So it's pretty reliable. It's very reliable. Highly reliable, I would say, especially when it's multiple accounts from the same event, and it's such a ridiculously traumatic event as well. Now, it's important to think not only about what was it that they experienced, how bad was it for the victims here, right? The residents of this building. Let's see here. Well, let's do official justification, right? DHS claimed the raid was targeting members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. Apparently, they're everywhere, right? They seem to be like the excuse of the day whenever ICE is doing something or the federal government wants to do something that's blatantly a violation of our civil rights. Whoa, it's Tren de Aragua. My goodness. Result, 37 people were arrested. Among those detained were at least 4 U.S. citizen children. The raid drew a formal condemnation from Amnesty International USA as a shocking disregard for human rights. So clearly a horrific experience for those involved as victims, right? The residents of these buildings. And you say, well, they did arrest 37 people. Well, some of those were kids. We don't have details on how many were Tren de Aragua. And especially with the Trump administration, right? We all saw Abrego Garcia, Gilmar Abrego Garcia, a dude, he does have tattoos on his fingers, right? And you saw a photoshopped image that shows MS13 above some images on those tattoos. And that was repeatedly referred to by members of the Trump administration, right? Members of ICE, of DHS, the president himself said, well, look, it's tattooed MS13 right there on his hand. Those were added via Photoshop, right? Those were to illustrate that what the possible interpretation of those tattoos on his fingers were. Okay, so I don't know yet, and I don't think anybody knows, if they actually found anyone from Tren de Aragua in that building. And I don't know if we'll ever know, which is a little bit disturbing because that's the excuse that they use for going in and violating everybody else's civil rights. Now, like I said, obviously traumatic for those who live through it as residents. What if we play the what if game for a moment, though? I don't know if any of you remember. I was in fourth grade, I believe, at the time when this happened, but outside a little town called Waco, Texas, you had a group of religious individuals who had a particular set of their own beliefs called the Branch Davidians. And in that circumstance, you had a part of the federal government. It wasn't ICE, it was ATF, so the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, who decided they wanted to arrest the leader of this organization, David Koresh, right? And you go watch a documentary on Netflix about it. There's a few of them. They're all very good. And there's some very important points that come out of that as well. It's lessons that I don't think we've learned as a country, like lessons that should be ingrained in anyone's mind who's running for office, who's serving as a representative or senator or president or fulfilling any office under the United States of America. What we had in that situation was a horrible situation where the ATF says, well, we suspect they're trafficking in guns and we suspect that there's this going on or that going on. They get a warrant, but instead of serving the warrant on David Koresh on his morning jog or when he's going into town, like they know they do, they decide they need to build up the profile of the ATF. They need to justify their budget. They need to raise some more funds so they can do cooler things. Kind of like ICE is doing now with was it 1.2 or $1.6 billion? And instead they set up a raid. In that raid, you have members of the BATF who entered the Branch Davidians' home, right? Their communal home, a compound, if you will, and end up getting shot, end up getting killed. And you have others who end up having to retreat. And then what ends up happening is I believe it went on for weeks, a standoff between the ATF, and I think by then they called in the FBI and they called in whoever. And eventually the ATF brings in tanks and just starts running the building, knocking the building over. At which point, depending on the documentary that you watch, I suppose, and it certainly wasn't common knowledge at the time, the Branch Davidians believe, yep, this is the end times for sure, lighted. And dozens and dozens of people who live there died, right? Now, fortunately, before they're all murdered, there are some negotiations that happen, and many women and children or older residents who wish to leave are allowed to leave. They end up suing later. So whatever documentary you watch the documentary where they follow the lawsuits that ended after this. Or that came about, right? There was, of course, criminal complaints against members of the Branch Davidians saying that they were breaking the law. And so even though they had surrendered and whatever, they wanted to be criminally prosecuted. Their attorneys were, quite frankly, magnificent. And what we learned through the process was, if the police are barging into your home like that, unannounced, using excessive force, especially in Texas, people will exercise their right to defend themselves. So as we're wrapping up the recording of this episode, a few things come back to mind for me regarding the attack on the Branch Davidians outside Waco, Texas. Now that occurred, the final attack that ended the standoff was April 19th of 1993, okay? And there was evidence, there's plenty of evidence, including to these Netflix documentaries as well, that nerve gas was used on American citizens during that standoff. You see the evidence afterwards of the skeletons where their whole bodies had been so contorted by the nerve gas that it actually would break their own back, break their own bones. So it's pretty gruesome, but definitely I think, especially considering what we're seeing going on in Chicago and in the Pacific Northwest with unconstitutional activities by the federal government, it warrants being reminded of what can happen. And to be fair, all those events took place under the Clinton administration, right? A famous centrist Democrat president. When we see kind of the opposite happening here under a Republican president. So there's that fact. But then the other thing that comes to mind, and I don't think I mentioned this in the episode, is what happens next. There's always going to be someone out there ready to retaliate. And on April 19th of 1995, exactly 2 years to the day, and he admitted this was part of the reason he did it, a man by the name of Timothy McVeigh detonated a bomb outside the Oklahoma City federal building, killing many federal agents, many civilians, and even their children, because there was a daycare inside that federal building as well. Okay, and it's almost like we haven't as a country learned the lesson that, well, and even since then, that was in the 90s, that was before 9/11, right? Since 9/11, we've had our entire army at war, right? The Marines, Navy, Air Force, everybody has been in a war mode with the war on terror. We've been sending young men overseas to go shoot people and break things in foreign countries, okay? Whether you think that's justified or it's not, we have those people here. And this recent church shooting that we saw in Grand Blanc and the one down in North Carolina, on the same weekend, we're having multiple mass shooting events, and many times being perpetrated by military veterans. So to be doing these sort of things like they did against the Branch Davidians back in the 90s, today, knowing that there's a lot of Americans, a lot of young men, a lot of American men who are willing to take revenge and have access to the firearms, the training, the bomb-making capabilities, things like that, it seems a bit reckless. It seems a bit reckless and a bad idea. So one more reason, everything that they're doing in Chicago, their show of force, and they're sending it out ICE, and now sending CBP, and now wanting to send the National Guard, is a really dumb idea. So one of the things that we hear a lot in the conservative media, and I just say in the conservative media because that's the only place I hear it, where you see, a commentator or somebody, some very popular ones are saying things like, oh, Christians are being killed in Ukraine. Christians are being killed in Gaza. Christian communities are being destroyed in the West Bank, and Christians are under attack in Israel or in any part of the world where something's happening that the people on the right don't want to see happen. They make some of those people Christians, or maybe they are Christians, or they recognize the fact that there are some Christians in the group, and they turn it into a Christian persecution event. Okay? So to those people, to those commentators, or the people who enjoy that narrative, I just want to ask you rhetorically, what do you think the religion or set of beliefs was of at least some of the people in that residential apartment building? Do you think some of them could have been Christians? And then I think we have to recognize that it doesn't really matter if they were Christians, or if they were Muslims, or if they were Quakers, or if they were Baptists or evangelicals or atheists or deists or members of the Baha'i faith, anything. Because in the United States of America, we have the Bill of Rights and the Constitution to protect all of us, all persons, against an out-of-control, tyrannical, over-aggressive, dictatorial government. We have the Bill of Rights to protect all of us. So for those who are worried about Christian persecution, I guarantee you some of those were Christians. And for those of you who are just concerned about any child of God being subjected to some massive injustice, well, we all are. I did not hear any reports coming out of Chicago about people defending themselves with deadly force. Thank God. Thank God that didn't happen. And let's hope it never does. But when you have a police agency, a law enforcement agency, blatantly violating the Constitution and taking, let's face it, it was an enormous risk on their part as well. People in Chicago have guns, not the law-abiding ones. Other people have guns. And let's just ask a rhetorical question. I won't say what I would do or how I would handle it, but let's ask a rhetorical question. You're asleep in your bed. It's 2 or 3 in the morning. You hear doors getting kicked in your building. Let's say you have a firearm. Let's say you have children sleeping in your apartment. What are you doing? What are you going to do? You don't know who those people are kicking the doors open. And I'm sure from time to time things like that happen in Chicago, so it may not be totally unexpected. But that's an incredibly dangerous situation to be putting the ICE agents in. So whoever's their boss, Kristi Noem, what are you thinking? That is absolutely unnecessary. It's an apartment building. There's probably one door, maybe two. And so if you have a warrant for someone and you need to serve that warrant or you need to arrest them, lay siege to the damn building. Like, you just put a couple undercover officers out there. You watch the front door. You watch the back door. Eventually, these guys that you're looking for, they're going to come out. You follow them a little. You grab them. You execute your warrant. Raiding a residential building full of U.S. citizens who have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. It's pretty damn stupid for the government to be pulling some sort of shenanigans like this. To vindicate your rights in a situation like this, your options are very limited. And if you have any inkling that it's the police and hopefully they're not going to kill you, take no action, right? Wait till you get to court to file a suit and get your justice then. And hopefully you and your family survive it up until that point. That's going to have to be the official advice here, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen if you think, oh, there is gang activity in this building again now, and they are kicking doors open, they're robbing everyone. Well, I don't want to get violated. I don't want to get raped. I don't want my kids to get raped or whatever, so I'm going to have to fire back. We don't want that, right? We don't want to live in a world like that. But that's the world you create when you allow law enforcement agencies to run these stupid raids. The stupid raid, like they did on the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, back in the early 90s. And it's a stupid raid that they pulled in Operation Midway on the residents of this building in Chicago. We only have the constitutional rights that the federal government are willing to acknowledge, because it takes too long to get those rights vindicated in court for them to have real effect. Okay? Now, you can still go to court and you can have those rights vindicated eventually, but we don't want to live in a world where every time the president or the head of DHS or the head of the Department of Justice decides they're going to just be holding raids and they'll just get sued and beg for forgiveness later. No, we don't want to live in a world like that. It's not fun. It's a dictatorial type of autocracy or oligarchy, or it's already not a rule of law. It's a rule by administrators. And that's a terrible thing, because then nobody really has rights. You don't have rights if they can be flagrantly disregarded on a whim. Now, I was mentioning at the beginning of the episode, and I was reading the text of the Fourth Amendment, we know that the founders believed that mankind was imbued with these inalienable rights, right? We as human beings, men and women, bond and free, have certain human rights, inalienable rights, gifted to us by our Creator, right? Or by nature, or nature's God, however you want to phrase it. We all have these rights that the government, our government, the United States government, has no right to infringe upon. How real is that when the government's free to infringe upon it? It's quite literally trampling the Constitution or spitting in the face of the founders. If a president and his administration, and this is what's happening today. It just happens to have a Republican in the White House right now. 1 year ago, it was a Democrat. We had the same problem. Before that, it was another Democrat. Before it was that, it was Trump. Before it was that, it was another. We've had this problem. But until we elect people who recognize and agree, and not just say it in words, but have the self-restraint to say, you know what, I would like to order a raid on that building, but not only is it a stupid idea strategically, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment rights of the U.S. citizens who live in that building. Unless we have leaders who understand that it's off limits to violate our constitutional rights, we got nothing. We can pretend we have this Constitution and it's amazing and hooray, USA, we're such a great country because we have the Constitution. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean a thing if you don't have leaders who are willing to exercise the self-restraint and honor and follow it. Okay, but we're not going to just get wound up about this today. There's other important things we want to talk about as well. So let's talk about some of the other things that are happening in Chicago, because this is one incident among many which are just as bad, and we're going to have to do probably separate episodes to cover all of them. September 12th, there's a fatal shooting. Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, an undocumented Mexican father. ICE officers fatally shot him. I mean, he's dead. He is unalived during a traffic stop in the suburb of Franklin Park. His lawyer stated he had no criminal record, only minor traffic infractions. And now he is no longer with us. A non-fatal shooting, October 4th, so just a few days ago. Marimar Martinez, a 30-year-old Chicago resident, Border Patrol agent shot and wounded her during a protest in Brighton Park. Now, officials claim she rammed her car into a federal vehicle. Her lawyer and other advocates dispute this. And while DHS initially alleged she was armed, the subsequent criminal complaint made no mention of a firearm. Advocates report that ICE... Well, okay, and about that incident, it's important to know that the modus operandi, like the way that ICE operates right now, and many law enforcement agencies that are less than reputable, is whenever there's an incident with a shooting where a civilian is shot, the first thing that the enforcement agency will say is, well, they rammed us, or they were threatening us, or, trying to shift the blame to the victim, right? It's blaming the victim so that they don't look bad and maybe can deflect some of the negative attention. When a few days go by, you realize, oh, that was a complete lie. The body cam footage, the cell phone footage, everything else contradicts that narrative. So not only are they violating people's rights by shooting them, now they're lying about it and trying to cover it up. All right. So in response to this, we've seen a number of things happen, right? The mayor, Brandon Johnson, signed an executive order to create ICE-free zones in the city of Chicago, blocking federal agents from using city-owned property as staging areas for civil immigration enforcement without a warrant. The state of Illinois responded. Governor J.B. Pritzker strongly condemned the South Shore raid and directed state agencies to investigate reports of child mistreatment. The state of Illinois and the city of Chicago jointly filed a lawsuit to block the deployment of National Guard troops, which so far is working, right? They've been blocked for now. Now, any sort of injunction that happens right away at the filing of a case is temporary. So we will have to see how that plays out. But for now, it looks like the National Guard will not be permitted to be deployed. Now, why? When we talk about the National Guard is supposed to be, according to some, the modern-day equivalent of the state militia. Okay? And those who are familiar with the Second Amendment, right? We talked about the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to protect our individual liberties. The Second Amendment starts off a well-regulated militia. It's not an amendment I've had to cite recently, but a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, okay? So it's mentioning a militia right here in the Second Amendment. The National Guard is the modern-day equivalent of a state militia, okay? A militia is a military force organized of citizens designed to be called upon by the state or, in certain circumstances, the President of the United States. So why would we need to deploy the militia, the National Guard, into a city, into Chicago? And their justification for that is, well, it's Antifa. Nobody's even seen Antifa in Chicago, okay? What they're seeing is a few people, and there's video of it. It's not a lot of people, but it's some people, mostly pastors, local nonprofit immigrant rights advocates, protesting at ICE buildings. This is not Antifa. I'm sure they all feel like being an anti-fascist is a good thing. Antifa doesn't even have a website. They're not an organized group. So what we're seeing instead is pastors getting shot in the face or in the head with pepper ball guns, right? So essentially a paintball gun that shoots out a pepper irritant, but when you get hit with it in the head, can cause severe damage. And again, everybody wants to say, well, it's a non-lethal weapon. It will give you traumatic brain injury. It will give you a traumatic brain injury. It will give you brain damage. Crying out loud. And instead of saying, well, I guess it's their First Amendment right to free speech and to protest, shoot them. Just start shooting at them. And we saw this with news reporters. We saw, which again, freedom of the press, First Amendment. And now a pastor, freedom of religion, also in the First Amendment. And anyone else there protesting, freedom of speech. Okay, now are there times where they get out of control, where a protester may, like, for example, break the window of a vehicle? Yeah, you can't be doing that. That's not protected speech. You'll probably get shot for that. Don't do it. Okay, but that is a minority of the time that these things are happening. They're saying, oh, well, they were blocking the entrance. No, they weren't. It's very clear in the video. And again, ICE is out there just lying about it. Second Amendment. Right. National Guard. So why would we need to deploy the National Guard into a city? The National Guard gets deployed in emergency situations. The National Guard can get activated and sent to frickin' Iraq and Afghanistan. They have military training. They are part of the military officially from time to time. So why do we need to deploy the military on the streets of the United States? Well, there's a Posse Comitatus Act that says you can't, but it's happening. And the administration now is saying, oh, well, it's an insurrection. Careful, because it's not. But again, like I was saying earlier, the only way that we as Americans have the constitutional rights that we so proudly trumpet around the world and to each other in our echo chambers, the things that make us a good Christian nation, the things that make us better than all other nations, according to some. The thing that sets us apart, do we really have it if we don't have leaders who respect it? When you arrest someone, when a police officer, when a law enforcement agent arrests someone, they need to have probable cause. Probable cause that a crime was committed and that this person did it. It has to be something more than 50% likelihood, right? And in order to stop you, they need reasonable suspicion. These are things that have been set in place by the United States Supreme Court over the years. These standards exist for a reason. They exist because we have the Fourth Amendment. Now, ICE, in their unbridled enthusiasm recently, what they've been doing is they've been approaching people, detaining people, and arresting people, whether they're U.S. citizens or not. Now, their authority does not extend to U.S. citizens. If you're under arrest by ICE and you can show that you are a U.S. citizen, which all you have to do is allege it, right? According to the policy manual and the memos and the procedures that ICE has to operate under, if somebody makes a claim to U.S. citizenship, for example, when I was taking detained cases as an immigration attorney, if we had a client who said, hey, you know what, my dad was a U.S. citizen, am I automatically one? And they would even screen for this at the immigration detention center at one of the county jails. If ICE gets wind that you have a viable or potential claim to U.S. citizenship, even a potential claim, not that you've proven it yet, but that potentially you're a U.S. citizen, in the past, their attitude would change immediately. It would be, whoa, you get your family to come pick you up. We are not going to hold on to you if we suspect that that's the case, because it's an egregious violation of the law. Now, instead, what's happening is on these arrest outings, on these dragnets that they're performing across the country, is instead of, just respecting the fact that we're only going to stop people who we know are undocumented or we have probable cause to believe that they're undocumented by something other than just the way that they look or the language that they speak, they're grabbing everybody. Okay. And so there's many, many instances now, legitimate, right? Legitimate instances. And these, I hope every single one of them turns into a lawsuit against ICE, because it's an egregious violation of your rights, especially when you're detained, handcuffed. If you're one of these kids, zip tied, just imagine the trauma that these kids are going to live through now, that they're going to have to deal with as they grow. And ICE isn't going to be there to provide them with counseling or therapy. So they better reach out to some competent attorneys over in the Chicago area, take ICE to federal court, sue the U.S. government. But just imagine. So instead of what's happened, instead of, ICE having a judicial warrant to stop, arrest, detain people, they're just going out in a dragnet style, right? Think about one of those big fishing nets that they drag along the bottom of the ocean, right? To sort of grab up whatever's there. That's what they're doing. They're going in, they're saying, well, we're just going to arrest people and we're not going to pay so much attention to their civil rights. If we look at the first Trump administration, this was happening so much in the Chicago area that a lawsuit was brought, right? And this lawsuit, where is it here? ICE during the first Trump administration filed a lawsuit alleging that agents in the Chicago area were engaging in a pattern of improper and unconstitutional arrests. The core of the complaint was that the agents were arresting people without having the legally required probable cause and without proper warrants. To settle that lawsuit, the federal government, under the Biden administration, entered into a consent decree in 2022. Now, what a consent decree is, it's essentially a settlement saying, hey, all right, we're not going to admit guilt, but we're going to agree that we're going to do this instead from now on, and then we're going to, settle the lawsuit that way. So that happened in 2022. It's a legally binding agreement approved and overseen by a court. So it had to be approved by a judge that resolves the dispute and requires one party to change its behavior. This 3-year agreement, right now it's 2025, placed specific restrictions on ICE's operations in Illinois and nearby states. Its primary purpose was to force agents to adhere to constitutional standards, specifically the requirement to have probable cause before making a warrantless arrest. Okay? Again, that's code for Fourth Amendment violations were happening rampantly. Now, what happened in May of this year? 3 years are up. ICE releases a memo, says, hey, you know what? We're declaring that consent order dead. That's not how it works. You got to go to court and make sure that the judge agrees that, yes, now it looks like you complied with it. That fulfills the terms of the agreement. Now the case is settled. So while the judge was considering this request, a top ICE lawyer took matters into their own hands in June of 2025. They sent the email to all agency employees advising them the consent decree was dead. The email officially rescinded the agency's policies that complied with the decree, effectively telling agents they no longer had to follow the stricter rules on warrantless arrests. But this action by ICE set the stage for recent court battles. The civil rights groups argued ICE was not only trying to prematurely kill the agreement, but had already been violating it before it even expired. In an October 2025 ruling, so just days ago, Judge Jeffrey Cummings sided with the civil rights group. He found that ICE had, in fact, been violating the consent decree since at least January and February of 2025 by making at least 22 warrantless arrests. The ICE lawyer's attempt to declare the decree dead was improper. He officially revived the consent decree and extended it until February of 2026, forcing ICE to continue operating under the stricter rules and court oversight. We're going to have to see how the administration responds to that. We know that they typically will have contempt for orders that go against what they want to do, and they'll start probably trash talking this judge. They'll probably say, oh, well, now we need the Insurrection Act, and that trumps whatever the judge wants to do. I keep saying Trump, which it supersedes what the Trump or now I'm all confused. They'll say, well, now it's time to invoke the Insurrection Act. That will supersede what Judge Jeffrey Cummings ordered, and so we don't have to listen to it. right? So these are the sort of things that we may be facing with the leaders that have been elected. Again, that case was called the Castanon-Nava. It's the Castanon-Nava Settlement Agreement. So it's probably Castanon-Nava v. U.S. or v. USA. Of course, Chicago's not the only place where things are happening. There have been all sorts of things happening in California with ICE arrests. Same problem, right? Arresting people based on how they look. And so there was a federal court that said, yeah, you can't do that. That's blatantly unconstitutional. The Trump administration appealed it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, well, for now, do what you got to do, because we want to see how that lower court case plays out. And then if there's another appeal, we'll hear that appeal. And that is in a case called Nome, like Kristi Nome, the head of DHS, v. Vasquez Perdomo. Okay, so Vasquez Perdomo was probably one of these people who was arrested based on that. And what Justice Brett Kavanaugh did is he wrote what they call a concurring opinion, where he agreed with the majority but wanted to state his own reasons. And according to him, ethnicity alone may not be enough, but it can be a factor. It can be one of the central factors. And what ICE is essentially doing is saying, well, they look Latino, they don't speak much English, they're in a place where people are working low-wage jobs, so therefore that's highly suspicious and gives us probable cause to arrest them. But the real question that we need to ask when we're considering that question is, well, can you have a situation where you have someone who looks Latino, maybe is poor, maybe is working a low-wage job, but are in fact a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident? And I can tell you the answer to that is yes. You can have people who look Latino, but are born here U.S. citizens or hold valid green cards, and so are not subject to arrests on the whim of a hat or at the whim of a masked officer. So what they're saying now is that these are Kavanaugh arrests, or this is the Kavanaugh doctrine. It's not something I think he's going to be proud to have his name attached to, because it results in so many constitutional violations that are truly inexcusable. But that's the state of our Supreme Court right now. And I think if you read the dissenting opinions by Judge Sotomayor, who is Latina herself, you'll see that it was not a unanimous decision by far. So the whole point of the Supreme Court is to make decisions when there are disputes, especially when having to do with constitutionality of certain practices, laws, etc. And so what's really heartwarming as a lawyer to see is those instances where you have a Supreme Court justice who very clearly is standing up for what's right, is standing up for the Constitution. And ironically, according to, if you grew up with a more conservative mindset or a more liberal mindset, you may have thought, well, liberals believe in a living, breathing constitution that needs to change and adapt in order to serve humanity or to serve the country at this time in history. And you may have seen the conservative wing or those appointed by Republicans as the more strict constructionalists or strict textualists, where they're going to say, well, we're going to stick to the plain words of what the Constitution says as was originally intended by the founders, and we're going to do that. That's a false dichotomy. That is a 100% false dichotomy, especially when having to do with any topic related to civil rights. And to illustrate, I want to read the following section, and then I'm going to tell you who wrote it. The government, and now the concurrence, has all but declared that all Latinos, U.S. citizens or not, who work low-wage jobs are fair game to be seized at any time, taken away from work, and held until they provide proof of their legal status to the agent's satisfaction. As the district court found, and the government does not meaningfully contest, the present evidence reveals that the operation at large, seizures occurred based solely upon the four enumerated factors, either alone or in combination. The government now asks this court to bless that conduct, at least temporarily, by issuing a stay. The government, however, has not demonstrated the necessary likelihood of success on the merits to warrant this court's extraordinary intervention. The Fourth Amendment imposes limits on search and seizure powers in order to prevent arbitrary and oppressive interference by enforcement officials with the privacy and personal security of individuals. Whenever a police officer accosts an individual and restrains his freedom to walk away, he has seized that person, and the Fourth Amendment requires that seizure be reasonable. As relevant here, officers may stop an individual only if they are aware of specific articulable facts, together with rational inferences from those facts that reasonably warrant suspicion that the individual may be illegally in the country. This requires more than an inchoate and unparticularized suspicion or hunch of criminal activity. Okay? Now, beautiful, first of all. Beautifully written, lays out the law, lays out the protections that the Fourth Amendment guarantees all persons in the United States, and especially U.S. citizens. Sonia Sotomayor, okay? Not traditionally the strict textualist or, because she was appointed by a Democrat, many people think, oh, well, they're just a liberal judge. They're just always going to say it's a living, breathing Constitution. We can change it however we want. No, that's not how it works, especially in matters of civil rights. In this case, we see a justice who says, no, the law says this. It protects us for a good reason, and no, you can't do it. No, we shouldn't bless it. Now, unfortunately, this was from the dissent. So in the situation of whether the court was going to give a temporary stay in order to bless this behavior, she was in the minority. And you can guess who was on the other side. Many of them who were appointed by the man who's seeking to do all these things. So I just wanted to point that out because I thought the language was concise and beautiful. And, there is this false dichotomy out there of, oh, well, they were appointed by a Democrat. They're just a far left liberal who's just wants to, give transgender operations to everyone and take away your guns. No. In this instance, and in many instances, and I've noticed it as a pattern with this justice in particular, with Justice Sotomayor, who notably Latina. So you can see how when you put yourself in the situation of being one of these individuals, if she's walking down the street in Chicago, she could literally be picked up. A Supreme Court justice could be picked up by ICE, held until she shows a naturalization certificate, a birth certificate, which nobody walks around with a birth certificate in their pocket. And I'll tell you what, in dealing with ICE in times past, years past, right, some things don't change. And one thing that doesn't change for them, and you can see this in videos that are getting released to the public, where they are performing these stops in Chicago. They're stopping these Latino kids and saying, hey, are you a U.S. citizen? Can you prove it? Like, I can't prove it. I have a school ID, but I don't have anything. Well, let me take a picture of you then so we can check our data. So I can check our database. Like there's some accurate database of photos of U.S. citizens out there. I don't believe there is, but I guess we need to look into that. And you may say, well, Attorney Betzold, it's really not a big deal. All they got to do is prove they're a U.S. citizen. How hard could that be? It's really hard. It's really hard. And let me tell you why. I'll give you an example. The type of people that you're dealing with when you're dealing with ICE. And apparently they're as bad as they ever have been. So I think this story is very relevant. We had a client who we were fighting for him in immigration court, did everything we could. There was really nothing else we could do. We asked for what's called voluntary departure. The judge granted that. Okay, and in voluntary departure, you pay a $500 bond unless you're detained. And this person was detained until they literally brought him to the airport and he was flown out of the country on a one-way ticket. Well, we show up to provide the ticket to ICE, and this ICE officer, wearing nasty, smelly shoes, unkempt hair, probably had been drinking that morning. I wouldn't put it past him. This individual is there saying, oh, well, where's the ticket? I said, got it right here. I showed him the confirmation number, the the paperwork showing, all the information from the airline, his name, ID information, stuff like that, handed it to them so that they could go confirm it, right? Because what you can do is you go online and you put in the information. You can confirm that there's a ticket there. There's no such thing as a paper ticket that you can buy or print out for yourself, right? You can't even check in until like 24 hours before the flight anyway, so you can't even go print your boarding pass. Well, we bring this to them and he goes, well, what's this? How am I supposed to know what this is? Well, how do you that could be anything. You could have just made this up. I went to law school. I passed the bar. I passed the ethics screening. I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the country and the state. And now I've got to explain myself or try and prove a negative when all he's got to do is go on his computer. Because when you're in an ICE facility, they typically don't let you you can't bring in your computer to prove it, right? And now they're questioning my integrity. I'm sorry, high school graduate ICE officer. You got to be smarter. Okay, so imagine this type of idiot. Imagine trying to deal with this type of idiot in a stressful arrest detainment situation when you're out, walking home in Chicago and they say, well, prove you're a U.S. citizen. Well, I am. Well, what do you have? Well, I have a school ID. That doesn't prove anything. And it doesn't, right? It's not legitimate proof of U.S. citizenship. Well, I have a driver's license. Well, that's not proof of U.S. citizenship either. Well, I have a social security card. Well, that's not either. And nobody walks around with a social security card. And not a lot of people really have their passports. And nobody walks around with a copy of their birth certificate. And even if they did, under what the Trump administration wants to do now, is they want to get rid of birthright citizenship. So you won't even have that anymore. So how do you prove it? Think. How do you prove it? How do you prove it? You don't. You're stuck being detained by an ICE officer, some idiot ICE officer, Border Patrol officer, now deployed to the interior of the United States, bullying people. That is not going to end well. Probably fortunate that more people in Chicago don't have guns. The rest of the country does. So it's just a terrible situation to put agents in. So talking about that, knowing that for now, you have a Supreme Court where one of the justices, and if even one, is willing to go along with permitting a federal agency to arrest people based on their poverty, based on how they look, based on the language they speak. I mean, the whole southwest of the United States was Mexico for a long time, right? It was. It's ours now, right? We're not giving it back. I'm not saying we should and we shouldn't. It is the United States, and I think we need a nation that goes from sea to shining sea. But I'm saying when you go and you're trying to judge if someone's undocumented based on how they look, that's a terrible way to do it in the Southwest United States. Terrible. It just doesn't make any sense. And you may even have first or second generation individuals who, maybe they speak both languages, but in public they're only speaking Spanish because they're with their Spanish speaking buddies. And, maybe they never went to college. Maybe they never, rose out of the barrio or whatever. So it doesn't, I want to say it's unconstitutional. It doesn't pass the test that the Supreme Court has laid out, but we just have a Supreme Court who said something this dumb, okay? This dumb, this egregious. Now, at the beginning, I said this sort of hits close to home, not just because Chicago is only a few hours away. And many times when we travel, we fly out of O'Hare or Midway. So we, as a family, Attorney Betzold and his family will go there. We can't go there now. I hope you understand that. And I'm sorry, Chicago, because your downtown is pretty sweet. You got a lot of awesome restaurants. We go, we'll have immigration court or immigration conferences there, right? That's where the nearest asylum office is. I probably can go myself, right? Look at me. I'm white. No one's going to mistake me for Latino probably. But I married a Latina. My kids look Latino. And if you think for a minute, I'm going to take them anywhere where I see ICE performing warrantless arrests, where they're performing raids, where they're kicking down doors and zip tying children, that tells me they have no qualms about it. I'm not subjecting my children to that. F you. I will not visit Chicago, at least unless I'm doing business, but my family is not coming. And I would be suspecting that there's probably a huge drop in tourism in Chicago anyway because of this. Not to mention the other cities that are becoming subject to this. I can't do it because if I'm there and I'm walking with my wife downtown Chicago and some masked person comes up to me and starts thinking they're going to detain my wife, I'll probably have to throw hands. I might end up getting shot, and then I'm dead. There's certain things, and I would love to hear some of the mainstream conservative commentators just consider this for a moment, right? And I don't know if the Tucker Carlsons out there or others are married to someone of a Latino origin, right? If you're married to a Latina and she looks Latina and you're in a public place and an ICE officer approaches and attempts to detain your spouse when you are literally doing nothing wrong, but they see she's Latina and they're allowed to stop and arrest anyone because that's how they look and yada, yada, yada. Would someone be justified in defending against a clearly unlawful arrest? I mean, this is another just awful idea. It's as bad of an idea as it is to raid a residential building at 3 a.m. in Chicago. It's that stupid, and it's that stupid for the same reason. Okay? Now, honestly, I'm an attorney. I know I can go to court, and I will sue the pants off whatever agency tries to perform an unlawful arrest against me or my loved ones. Okay. Am I going to lose my patience in the meantime? I hope not. Right. I hope not. I can usually keep that under control, the temper and everything but when you're arresting a loved one, when someone that you love is being unconstitutionally and unlawfully arrested, detained, whatever, all bets are off. You don't know which people out there are going to be carrying a concealed weapon and will decide that this is absolutely unacceptable. I don't know who this person is. They've not identified themselves. They're not wearing any identifying information. I'm going to have to defend my wife with deadly force. And then we're going to start seeing stories like that. And that's not going to be anyone's fault except the head of DHS, the head of ICE, and the president of the United States who lets it happen. It's just if you think about these different public policy issues and you play them out to their natural end, these are the type of questions that have to be asked, and I am sure they're not being asked now, right? We're seeing certain federal government officials drunk with power. Oh, well, we can do this, and we're going to use this as a justification, and we're going to be strong-arm this, and we're going to take dictatorial type power. We're going to literally dictate the new standards and the new laws, and we're not going to have the courts stop us, and we're not going to give them time to stop us either. These are all very, very bad ideas. So I wanted to share that because it's incredibly personal to me. It hits really close to home, physically and family-wise. So I want you to consider that as we consider the future of the country, as we consider what's happening in the news recently and these stories that come out. And when you hear about these, big immigration enforcement operations, pay attention to the details because there is so much that's not showing up in the reports, right? The first question is, well, did they have a warrant? If the SWAT team gets a warrant signed by a judge saying, yeah, you can raid this building. Well, we read it. We read it here, the Fourth Amendment. What does it say? It has to speak with particularity about the items and locations to be searched. You probably won't have a judge that says, raid the whole building. No, they're going to say, okay, investigator, which apartments do we suspect these Tren de Aragua gangsters living in? You can search those. Go raid those apartments. Not the whole building. Again, it's another one of these just quick constitutionality checks. crazy what's happening out there these days. So thanks for listening today. Boy, I don't even really know the best way to end the podcast. It seems like one of more of the somber ones. Of course, we do have our sponsor, which is Prima.Law. That is legal case management. It's cloud-based legal case management for attorneys of many types. One who we specifically serve are the immigration lawyers. Now, we can serve immigration lawyers and we can serve immigration practitioners, right? Those who can lawfully prepare forms, etc. And it's a piece of software that we built to use in our law firm, and then we license it out, so you can have your own account as well and have the benefit of our 15 years of experience practicing immigration law, 15 years plus now. We have over 150 predefined case types that we provide. So if you need to file a VAWA case or a family petition, you have the benefit of the checklist, the same checklist that we use in our law firm to know which documents we need to include in order to make sure it is a strong and legitimate case. We have the different steps you need to go through to complete the case. We have all the forms themselves. We have the tool to combine all the uploaded documents that your client's going to upload to their client portal to automatically put those into one convenient PDF package with a table of contents, page numbers, a cover letter, everything you need to conveniently put into one PDF so you can submit that to the government or use our electronic filing tools. You can find a free 15-day trial at www.Prima.Law. I want to thank you for joining us today for this episode of the Prima.Law podcast.